The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a bill for coal and a note from the church about the harvest fund. Eleanor Whitmore almost threw it away without opening it, thinking it was another notice about her mother's debts. But the wax seal caught her eye. It bore the crest of the Duke of Ashworth, a house so far above her own that she had never expected to receive anything from it in her life. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was an invitation to the Duke's autumn ball, addressed not to her, but to her cousin, Margaret Hale. Margaret had died of a fever 3 months earlier, and it seemed the news had not yet reached the great house. The invitation had been sent to the last address on record, which happened to be the small cottage Eleanor now shared with her mother. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the elegant handwriting. Her mother, Constance, was upstairs resting, worn thin by worry over the estate. The family's small farm, the only thing standing between them and complete ruin, was tied up in a legal dispute with a distant relative who claimed the land should have passed to him instead. The proof that would settle the matter once and for all, a deed signed decades earlier, had gone missing years before, lost somewhere in the chaos of old family papers. Without it, they stood to lose everything within the month. Eleanor did not believe in signs, not really, but she believed in opportunity, and this felt like one. She had heard rumors, whispered among the servants at the market, that old Duke Ashworth's family had once done business with her grandfather. If any paper trail existed that could help her case, it might lie somewhere in that grand house, forgotten in a drawer or a ledger nobody thought to check. It was a foolish plan, she knew that, even as she began to form it, but foolish plans were sometimes the only ones left to a woman with no money and no time. She wrote back accepting the invitation under her cousin's name, reasoning that no one at the ball would know Margaret personally. The families had never been close, and Margaret had lived quietly, rarely traveling far from home. Eleanor told herself it was not truly deception, only borrowing a name the way she would soon borrow a gown, out of necessity rather than malice. The gown itself came from her aunt, who kept an old trunk of dresses from better days. It was a deep blue silk, slightly out of fashion, and it fit Eleanor's frame imperfectly, loose at the waist and a touch too long at the hem. Her aunt pinned it as best she could, and told her to walk carefully. On the night of the ball, Eleanor arrived at Ashworth House in a hired carriage that rattled the whole way up the long drive. She had never seen a home so large. Candlelight poured from every window, and the sound of music drifted out into the cold evening air. Her heart pounded as she stepped down and handed her invitation to the footman at the door. He read the name, glanced at her once, and waved her through without comment. Inside, the ballroom glittered. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls of light, and the guests moved in silks and satins that made her borrowed gown feel even more like a costume. She kept to the edges of the room, accepting a glass of wine she did not drink, watching the swirl of dancers, and trying to work out how she might slip away unnoticed to search the house. She had gathered, through careful questions to her aunt and a little local gossip, that the Duke kept his family's older papers in a study on the ground floor, behind the library. It was there she intended to go, once the ball was in full swing, and attention was fixed on the dancing, rather than on one quiet guest near the wall. She did not notice, at first, that she herself was being watched. Julian Ashworth, the Duke, stood near the far end of the room, half listening to a conversation about crop prices, his eyes drifting again and again toward the woman in blue by the window. There was something familiar about her, though he could not place it immediately. She held herself apart from the crowd, not from shyness, he thought, but from focus, as though she were waiting for something. It was her laugh that finally placed her in his memory. A neighbor made some small joke, and she laughed briefly before catching herself, covering her mouth with her hand. He had heard that laugh before, 3 years earlier, at a country inn where his carriage had broken an axle during a storm. He had spent the evening in the inn's common room while repairs were made, and a young woman with ink stains on her fingers had shared her table with him, unaware of his title, talking easily about books and about her family's small farm. She had laughed at something he said, quickly covering her mouth the same way. He remembered her name from that night, Eleanor, not Margaret. He watched her a while longer, turning the memory over, and noticed how her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway that led to the private wing of the house. She was not there to dance. She was there for something else entirely. Julian excused himself from his conversation and made his way toward the study himself, taking a longer route through the house so as not to draw attention. He reached the room before she did and waited in the shadow near the bookshelves, curious rather than alarmed, wanting to understand rather than to catch her out. Eleanor slipped through the ballroom doors an hour later, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway beyond was dim and quiet, lit only by a few low candles. She found the study easily enough, its door slightly ajar, and slipped inside, closing it softly behind her. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Shelves lined every wall, and a large desk sat near the window, covered in ledgers and letters. She moved toward it, scanning the spines of the books for anything that might relate to her family's land, her fingers trembling as she began to search through a stack of correspondence. She did not hear him approach until his voice broke the silence. "You won't find what you're looking for in the letters from this year," Julian said quietly. "Those papers are older. They're kept in the cabinet by the window." Eleanor spun around, the color draining from her face. For a moment she could not speak at all, caught between the urge to run and the certainty that running would only make things worse. The man before her wore fine evening clothes, and though she had never seen him up close, she understood immediately who he must be. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "I imagine you can," he said, though not unkindly. "But first, perhaps you might tell me why Margaret Hale walks and speaks so differently than I remember her family describing her, and why she seems to know exactly what she's searching for in my father's old papers." Eleanor's throat tightened. There was no use pretending any longer. She set down the letters she had been holding and folded her hands in front of her, bracing herself for whatever consequence might follow. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "Margaret was my cousin. She passed away some months ago, and the invitation was addressed to her by mistake. I should have returned it. Instead, I came in her place, because I needed to find something, and I did not know how else I might gain entrance to this house." She expected anger. She expected him to call for a servant, to have her removed from the property in disgrace, her family's name ruined along with what little remained of their fortune. Instead, Julian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he did something she did not anticipate at all. He smiled, faintly, and asked her to sit. "3 years ago," he said, "during a storm, I broke down on the road near a small inn. I spent an evening there while my carriage was repaired, and I met a young woman who did not know who I was. She talked to me about books, about her family's farm, about her hopes for the future. She had ink on her fingers from writing letters for the innkeeper's wife, who could not read or write herself. I never forgot that evening. I did not know her full name, only that she called herself Eleanor." Eleanor stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. "That was you," she said softly. "The gentleman with the broken carriage." "It was," he said. "I recognized your laugh tonight, before I recognized your face. And I confess, I was curious enough to follow you here, rather than raise an alarm." She did not know what to say. The room felt suddenly smaller, the candlelight warmer, though her heart still raced with the fear of discovery and the strange unraveling of a coincidence too large to fully comprehend. "I'm searching for a deed," she admitted finally, seeing no reason left to hide the truth. "My family's land is under dispute. A distant relative claims it should pass to him, and without proof of the original transfer, we may lose the farm before winter's end. I remembered hearing, from servants at the market, that your family once did business with my grandfather. I hoped there might be some record here that could help us." Julian was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Then he rose and crossed to the cabinet by the window, the one he had mentioned earlier, and began sorting through its contents with the ease of someone familiar with the room. "I know the dispute you speak of," he said, as he searched. "It reached my attention some months ago, through a matter entirely unrelated to you. My late father had dealings with several families in the county, and when I took over the estate's affairs after his passing, I found discrepancies in some of his older transactions. Your family's case was among them." Eleanor's breath caught. "You knew about it already?" "I did," he said. "I had intended to look into it further, though other matters delayed me. Finding you here tonight, in this room, Searching for the very thing I had already begun to investigate feels less like coincidence and more like the world correcting itself. He pulled a folded document from the cabinet and held it up to the candlelight, examining it briefly before offering it to her. This is a copy of the original agreement between your grandfather and my father. It confirms the transfer of the land to your family, signed and witnessed. I believe this is what you came looking for. Eleanor took the paper with hands that shook badly enough that she nearly dropped it. She unfolded it carefully, scanning the faded ink, and felt tears rise unexpectedly in her eyes. It was there, exactly as she had hoped. Proof enough to end the dispute, to save her mother's home, to close the door on months of fear and uncertainty. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I came here tonight, prepared to steal this, if I had to. I never expected honesty to be rewarded. You did not steal anything, Julian said gently. You searched for what was rightfully yours, taken through no fault of your own. I would rather return it freely than have you carry the weight of having taken it in secret. They sat together for a while longer, the ball continuing distantly beyond the study walls, its music muffled by thick doors and thicker stone. Julian asked about her mother, about the farm, about the years since their meeting at the inn. Eleanor found herself speaking more freely than she had in months, the fear that had gripped her all evening, slowly loosening its hold. He told her, in turn, about the weight of his own new responsibilities, the estate he had inherited sooner than expected, the loneliness of a house too large for the quiet life he had once imagined for himself. There was an ease between them that neither had anticipated, born not of the grandeur around them, but of a shared honesty neither had expected to find that night. The candles burned low as the hours passed. When Eleanor finally rose to leave, dawn was already beginning to lighten the sky outside the study windows, pale and gray over the distant hills. Julian walked her to the door himself, insisting on arranging a carriage to see her safely home, one considerably steadier than the one that had brought her. You still wear a name that is not your own, he said, as she paused at the threshold, the deed folded carefully inside her cloak. For one more night, she said, allowing herself a small smile. Tomorrow, I will be simply Eleanor again. I think, Julian said, I would like to know that Eleanor a little better, if she would allow it. She left Ashworth House as the sun rose over the fields, the borrowed gown still hanging loosely at her shoulders, the deed pressed safely against her heart. She had come in secret, prepared for discovery and disgrace, and left instead with her family's future secured, and an unexpected door left open towards something she had never dared to hope for. Her mother wept when she saw the paper, clutching Eleanor's hands, and asking again and again how such a thing had come to pass. Eleanor told her the truth. All of it. The mistaken invitation, the borrowed dress, the Duke who had recognized her from a chance meeting years before and chosen kindness over exposure. In the weeks that followed, the legal dispute was settled quietly and completely, the farm secured for good. And though Eleanor never wore that particular blue gown again, she found herself, before the year was out, standing once more in the halls of Ashworth House, this time under her own name, invited freely and welcomed warmly by the man who had known her secret before dawn, and had chosen, in that quiet hour, to protect her rather than expose her. It was not the ending she had imagined when she first broke the seal on that mistaken letter. It was better, because it had been built not on borrowed things, but on truth finally spoken aloud, and on a kindness neither of them had expected to find in a house so full of strangers.